Oluchi Benifo was known in the small town of Nsukka for her quiet beauty and gentle ways, but behind closed doors, she had one strange rule. Her husband, Togchukwu, was never allowed to eat anything after sunset. No matter how hungry he came home, she would firmly say, "It's for your own good," and lock the kitchen. At first, Togchukwu laughed it off, thinking maybe it was her way of keeping him healthy. But the rule never changed, not even on special occasions. If he brought food home late, she'd take it from him and store it away until morning. Even when he begged or argued, she wouldn't budge. She wasn't rude, just firm, and often emotional. Sometimes, she'd even cry while refusing him a plate. Friends who visited noticed the tension, but Oluchi always smiled, changing the topic. Togchukwu started to feel like a prisoner in his own home, confused and frustrated. Why was his wife, who loved him so deeply in every other way, suddenly so strict about something so basic? He once tried to sneak food, but she caught him just in time and hugged him tightly, whispering again, "I love you too much to lose you." That sentence haunted him. What could she possibly mean by that? It wasn't just a preference. It was something deeper, something hidden. She wasn't doing it out of control or cruelty. It was like she was afraid, not of him, but for him. That made it even more confusing. Togchukwu began noticing how tense Oluchi became as the sun went down. She'd rush dinner, clean up early, and always made sure nothing edible was left lying around. The rule wasn't just strict, it was sacred. As much as he tried to understand, the mystery behind her fear of food after sunset only grew. Little did he know, the answer was darker than he could ever imagine. The neighbors in Sukka started talking. Something about the Benifo household didn't sit right with them. It wasn't normal for a man to come home after a long day and be denied a simple plate of food. People noticed how Togchukwu never touched anything once the sun went down, no matter how hungry he looked. Word spread quickly. Some believed Oluchi was just a health freak, maybe following one of those new diets. She must be helping him lose weight, a market woman said. Others weren't so sure. They whispered darker theories behind closed doors. "That girl comes from the Nwokidi family," one old man muttered. "Her people used to perform strange night rituals. Maybe she's continuing them." A few even claimed they saw flickering lights in the kitchen late at night and heard faint chanting. But no one dared confront her. She was always polite in public, always smiling, carrying herself with grace. It made the rumors more unsettling. How could such a kind woman be hiding something so strange? Togchukwu heard the gossip. People hinted, joked, even warned him. But he laughed it off. He believed his wife. He thought maybe she was just overprotective or had some health fear. He trusted her, even when it made no sense. People will always talk, he told himself. Oluchi is just being careful. But deep down, the constant whispers began to bother him. He started watching her more closely. Her silence when people brought up food, the way she avoided eye contact when asked why he didn't eat at night, it all started to pile up. Still, he didn't want to believe the rumors. He loved her. She had never given him any reason to doubt her before. And yet, the air around their home felt heavier each evening. The sun would set, and so would his peace of mind. He told himself everything was fine. But in the quiet of the night, when Oluchi moved around silently after he had gone to bed, something about it all didn't feel right anymore. One rainy evening, Togchukwu returned home later than usual, his stomach growling with hunger. The traffic had been terrible, and he hadn't eaten since morning. As he stepped into the house, the scent of freshly cooked egusi soup still lingered in the air. He rushed into the kitchen, hoping to grab a quick meal, but Oluchi stood in his way, her face pale and her eyes wet with fear. "Please," he said, his voice low but desperate, "I just need a little food." She didn't speak. Instead, she reached for the kitchen key, locked the door, and held it tightly in her hands. Togchukwu was shocked. He had seen her strict before, but this time felt different. She was shaking. Her lips quivered as she whispered the same haunting words. "I love you too much to lose you." He stared at her, confused and angry. "What are you hiding from me?" he asked. She looked down, refusing to answer. His patience, already worn thin from hunger, snapped. He slammed his bag on the floor. "I'm your husband, not a child. Why are you treating me like this?" But instead of arguing back, Oluchi burst into tears. She clutched the key to her chest and sank to the floor, mumbling silent prayers. That moment changed something in Togchukwu. Until now, he believed she was just being overly cautious, maybe even a little strange. But now, her fear felt too real, not the kind of fear you fake. He watched her, sobbing on the floor, whispering things he couldn't understand. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about health. It was something else, something deeper. That night, he went to bed without eating, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't understand what was happening anymore. He lay in the darkness, listening to the sound of Oluchi crying softly in the next room. His hunger was nothing compared to the growing fear in his heart. He wasn't just starving for food anymore, he was starving for the truth. That night, long after Tobchukwu had fallen asleep with an empty stomach, something pulled him from his dreams. It was the smell, rich, warm, and unmistakably fresh food. His eyes opened wide. The house was silent, but the scent of something boiling filled the air. He glanced at the clock. It was midnight. Confused and curious, he got out of bed slowly and walked through the dark hallway. As he neared the kitchen, he noticed a soft, flickering glow coming from under the door. His heartbeat quickened. He moved closer, careful not to make a sound. The kitchen door was shut, but what he heard made him freeze. Oluchi's voice, low, shaky, and full of emotion, was whispering a prayer. She was crying. Through the tiny crack at the bottom of the door, he could hear the soft bubbling of a pot being stirred. The combination of her quiet weeping, the strange words of prayer, and the smell of food filled him with a mixture of confusion and fear. Why would she cook at this hour? And why was she praying over it? He leaned closer, holding his breath, trying to catch every word. Some phrases were in their local dialect, but the ones he understood made his stomach twist. She spoke of protection, of shadows, of keeping something away. It didn't sound like a normal prayer. It sounded like a plea. Tobchukwu stepped back, his mind racing. Was this what the neighbors had whispered about? Was this what she was hiding? He wanted to burst in and demand answers, but something inside him told him not to. Instead, he returned to the bedroom quietly, his heart pounding louder than his footsteps. Lying in bed, eyes wide open, he couldn't sleep. The image of his wife crying and stirring a pot at midnight haunted him. It was no longer just about food. Something dark was happening, something he didn't understand yet. And for the first time, Tobchukwu felt truly afraid of what he might discover. The next evening, Oluchi had to step out to visit her aunt who had suddenly fallen ill. As soon as she left, Tobchukwu sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the covered bowl of food she had left untouched on the kitchen counter. The temptation was unbearable. The smell of the jollof rice filled the air, rich and inviting. He hadn't eaten properly in 2 days. What could possibly happen? He whispered to himself. Maybe all this is just fear, or superstition. With shaky hands, he uncovered the bowl and slowly began to eat. At first, it felt like a small victory, warm food finally easing the ache in his belly. But hours later, just as the clock struck midnight, Tobchukwu shot up in bed with a scream. A sharp, burning pain stabbed through his stomach, as if something was clawing from the inside. He clutched his belly, gasping for air. His vision blurred, and the room suddenly felt colder. Then came the whispers, low, echoing voices that didn't sound human. Shadows began to move across the walls, twisting unnaturally. He tried to turn on the light, but the bulb flickered and died. In the darkness, he saw them. Dark figures standing by the door, faceless and tall, just watching. One moved closer, and though it didn't speak, Tobchukwu could feel the hatred, the warning, the curse. His breathing grew heavier. The pain worsened. He fell to the floor, trembling, trying to crawl away, but the shadows only came closer. He screamed for help, called Oluchi's name, begged for mercy, but there was no answer. It felt like the house itself was alive with something evil. Sweat poured from his body. The cold grew sharper. His heart raced so fast it felt like it would explode. And just when he thought it would be his last breath, the front door opened slowly. Oluchi stepped in, her eyes wide with horror as she saw him curled on the floor. She knew exactly what had happened. He had broken the one rule meant to save his life. Oluchi dropped her bag the moment she saw Tobchukwu on the floor, soaked in sweat, groaning in agony. His eyes were wide with terror, staring at something invisible, his hands clawing at his own stomach. She rushed to him and held his face gently, but he pushed her away, mumbling about shadows and voices. They were here. I saw them, he whispered. Oluchi didn't ask questions. She already knew. Her worst fear had come true. With trembling hands, she ran to the bedroom and returned with a small black calabash, red cloth, and a bundle of dry leaves tied with a string. She sat beside him, lit a candle, and began chanting softly, her voice low and steady. Tobchukwu could barely move, but he watched through hazy eyes as she dipped her fingers into the calabash and drew strange markings on his forehead and chest. She burned the leaves, letting the smoke fill the room, then placed her palm on his stomach and pressed hard, still chanting. As the ritual went on, the shadows that had haunted him began to fade. The room slowly warmed, and the pain in his stomach started to ease. His breathing steadied. The fear in his eyes turned to confusion. Oluchi didn't stop until the last flame died out. Then she leaned over and whispered, "You've awakened what I tried to protect you from." Tokchukwu sat up slowly, weak and stunned. "What was that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Oluchi didn't answer right away. She wiped his face with a cloth and looked at him with eyes full of sorrow. "You were never supposed to feel that. That's why I warned you." The silence between them was heavy. He wanted to scream, to ask more, but the memory of the pain and the dark figures kept his mouth shut. For the first time, he realized her rule wasn't madness or control, it was fear. Real, ancient fear. And now that it had been broken, there was no going back. Something had been disturbed, something that was never meant to wake. The next morning, Tokchukwu sat on the bed, silent and pale. His body still ached, and his mind was full of fear. Oluchi stood by the window, holding a small wooden box. She opened it slowly and pulled out an old black and white photo. Her grandmother, surrounded by men with tired eyes. She came closer and sat beside him. "You deserve the truth," she said quietly. She began to tell him what no one outside her family had ever known. Every firstborn husband in her bloodline, her father, her grandfather, 2 of her uncles, had all died in the same way. They were healthy, strong men, but shortly after getting married, each one fell ill and passed mysteriously. The only pattern? All of them had eaten food after sunset on the night of their deaths. Oluchi's voice trembled as she spoke. "My grandmother saw the pattern. She tried to tell people, but no one believed her. Until she lost her own son, my father, the same way. After that, her grandmother made a rule and passed it down to every woman in the family. If you ever marry, and your husband is the firstborn, never let him eat after sunset. Ever." Tokchukwu stared at her, his throat dry. "But why me?" he asked. "Why would this curse care about me?" She held his hand tightly. "Because you are the first son in your family. Just like the others. And I love you too much to lose you." She showed him a small cloth bag, filled with ashes and strange symbols, a piece of protection her grandmother had given her during their wedding. "I've been praying, fasting, doing everything I can to keep it from waking. But last night, it knew." Tokchukwu couldn't speak. Everything made sense now. The fear, the rules, the midnight rituals. It wasn't superstition. It was survival. And Oluchi had been carrying the weight of this curse alone, all to keep him alive. For the first time, he saw her not just as his wife, but as his silent protector. Days passed, but Tokchukwu couldn't shake off what had happened. Every time he looked at food, especially in the evening, his stomach twisted, not from hunger, but from fear. The pain, the shadows, the voices, they felt too real to forget. Yet, another part of him struggled to believe it. Was it really a curse? Or had his mind just played tricks on him? Maybe it was stress, maybe something spiritual. But maybe, just maybe, it was all in his head. Still, he couldn't bring himself to eat after sunset again. He began skipping meals entirely. Breakfast felt heavy, lunch made him nervous, and dinner, he avoided it like poison. Oluchi tried everything, gentle encouragement, silent prayer, even cooking his favorite dishes, but Tokchukwu had lost trust in the food itself. He would sit at the table, stare at the plate, and then push it away. The smell reminded him of that night. The memory of darkness crawling over the walls made his skin crawl. His body started to weaken. He lost weight, and his eyes grew dull. Friends noticed the change, but he had no words to explain. He couldn't tell them that food frightened him. He couldn't say that shadows whispered his name in the night. At night, he barely slept. Even with Oluchi by his side, he kept waking up in fear. Sometimes he thought he heard the whispers again, other times he swore he saw the shadows waiting in the corners. He began to wonder, was this the curse continuing, or was fear now its own poison? Oluchi watched him silently, her heart breaking. She knew he was trapped in a war between his love for her and the terror planted by that one broken rule. She wanted to comfort him, but even she didn't know if the danger was over or still watching. Tokchukwu was no longer the man who laughed at strange rules. Now, he was a man haunted by something he couldn't explain and couldn't fight. And with every passing night, he feared more than hunger. He feared what he might become if the curse wasn't broken for good. Oluchi knew the fear inside Tokchukwu was slowly destroying him. His body was growing weak, his spirit even weaker. He was alive, but no longer living. The curse still hovered like a dark cloud over their marriage. One night, as he lay in bed with hollow eyes, she made a quiet decision. If love had brought them together, love would save him. The next morning, before sunrise, she packed a small clay pot, a white wrapper, and the sacred necklace her grandmother had left behind. She didn't wake Tobchukwu. She only kissed his forehead and walked into the forest alone. Deep inside the woods stood an ancient shrine, a place women in her bloodline had visited only in times of great sacrifice. There, she knelt before the sacred stone, unwrapped the necklace, and began to chant. Her voice echoed through the trees, strong and steady, full of pain and love. She offered her voice, the one thing that carried her prayers, her stories, her comfort. With tears streaming down her face, she poured water into the clay pot and whispered her final words. The wind blew hard. The leaves trembled. A sharp pain shot through her throat, and then, silence. Her voice was gone. She woke up hours later at the shrine, her lips moving, but no sound came out. Yet her face glowed with peace. She had given everything. The curse was broken. That evening, back at home, she cooked dinner like always, smiling silently as Tobchukwu sat across from her. The fear in his eyes was still there, but she nodded slowly, giving him the strength to try. For the first time in weeks, he lifted the spoon after sunset, and ate. Nothing happened. No shadows, no whispers, no pain. Just the sound of spoons tapping plates and the quiet smile of a woman who had given her voice to give love a second chance. Tobchukwu looked at her, eyes full of emotion, and knew she had saved him. Not with words, but with sacrifice. Years passed, and the pain of that dark time faded slowly into memory. Tobchukwu grew stronger, healthier, and more grateful with every passing day. He never forgot what Oluchi had done for him, the day she walked into the forest and came back changed forever. Though she could no longer speak, she never stopped communicating. Her eyes, her smile, the way she touched his hand when he felt lost, everything still spoke louder than words. They lived quietly, peacefully, never breaking the new evening peace. Oluchi cooked, laughed silently, and loved him in all the ways she always had. Tobchukwu, now a man marked by both trauma and deep love, began sharing their journey with others. He was often invited to speak at marriage seminars and couples gatherings. People came expecting lessons on forgiveness or communication, but they got something deeper. At one such seminar, held in a small hall filled with young couples, Tobchukwu stood confidently at the front, Oluchi sitting quietly beside him. Her head was wrapped in a colorful scarf, and her calm face watched him with steady pride. He told their story from the beginning, the strange rule, the whispers, the fear, the pain, and finally, the sacrifice. The room was silent, every heart hanging on his words. Some wiped tears. Others held their partner's hands tightly. Tobchukwu didn't dramatize it. He spoke plainly, simply, letting the weight of what they'd lived through speak for itself. As he finished, he looked over at Oluchi. She smiled softly, eyes glistening. He turned back to the crowd and gave them the last line he always ended with, words that held everything. She lost her voice, but saved my life. The hall erupted in quiet sniffles and soft claps. Couples embraced. Some cried openly. And as Oluchi rose to join him at the front, holding his arm tightly, everyone could see it, the kind of love that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. A silent love, born from pain, held together by sacrifice, and stronger than any curse.